So today on Olitography we're going to check out the Pentacon FB and the Carl Zeiss Jenner lens. So in today's video we're going to be looking at the Pentacon FB, which is a 35mm Zeiss Ikon camera made behind the Iron Curtain in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And we're going to take it with us on an expedition to South Wales, and we're going to do a little shoot in the Church of St Mary's in Tintern on the side of the Wye Valley. It should be absolutely beautiful. Pentacon were a successful Eastern Bloc camera and lens manufacturer until unfortunately they were liquidated with the reunification of Germany by the Treuhand organization, which were tasked with the preservation of Soviet-owned companies. Fortunately though, they were picked up by a private enterprise and they continued as the Pentacon GmbH company. But unfortunately they had to outsource the camera and lens production at this point to South Korea. It's interesting because it's actually a Contax camera, but because it was made in the Eastern Bloc, they weren't allowed to use the Contax name. So the Pentacon name came about by taking penta as in pentaprism and con as in Contax and just sticking them together to get Pentacon. But it's actually effectively a Contax. This is not unlike a certain Japanese manufacturer that used the pentaprism and Contax name together. They just used the end of Contax rather than the beginning. So a friend of mine lent me this camera. So what do we do when people lend us cameras? We take them apart, right? No, seriously, it's not working that well. So the shutter's working all right, but the lens is fucking awful. So we're going to take the lens apart. You can see here someone's clearly had a go at this lens before, and it's pretty scuffed up, so let's try not to scuff it up anymore. The first thing I'm going to need is a lens screwdriver. This is a cheap newer one. To use this lens's proper title, it's the Carl Zeiss Bioter 58mm f2 Tessar Jenner or Jenner Tessar lens. It's a legendary lens that inspired the famous Helios lenses, but unfortunately I think this one is in a very sad condition. So I picked up this camera a few days ago from a friend of mine. I've not been able to test it properly. I've had the lens apart to clean it, and I've run the shutter through a number of times so it loosened up a bit, and I tested it with the app. But I've never actually loaded it, so this is going to be interesting. So this goes in here. I think this goes this way up. I'm just going to push it through there and find out which way it turns. It's going anti-clockwise, so we want to load that so it can spin anti-clockwise. And pop it in over the sprockets. Okay, I'm going to try one more. Normally I like to get as much out of my film as I can, but this time I'm just playing it safe. So this camera is really interesting because it's got some really strange features. The shutter itself has a rather interesting shutter speed selection system, which you can only use once you've cocked the shutter. So the wheel will turn in both directions. And you have a window here with two ears on it and a switch on the back. Now the switch allows you to choose between your slow shutter speeds and your fast shutter speeds. So black would be faster and the black arrow would appear in that ear, and red would be the slow shutter speed. So you select your appropriate side. Let's have black at 100th of a second. And you've got this horizontal rubber metal shutter system, which works like that. So I've managed to reassemble the lens. I've cleaned all the elements. They were filthy. and I've put back the focus in the right place. But I can't for the life of me figure out how the f-stop system works. So I'm either going to have to hold it in place with a bit of tape, or I'm just going to have to shoot at f16 or f5.6. 5.6 or bust, I think. I mean, that looks like 5.6, so let's see what we get. These lenses use an interesting system for the f-stop. Where the system is sprung, you then have to use a collar and a lock to set your f-stop properly. Unfortunately, the lock was broken on my lens, and looking online, that seems to be a common problem, and I wasn't able to fix it.
I just find it really unfortunate that no one is here now that I'm in this, because I think it would be really creepy if they just showed up and me like in the door.
What denotes the Pentacon FB from the Pentacon F is the fact that you've got this light meter on the top. Now the light meter just has a door to the sensor, and in one of the windows here you would set your ASA, and then you would simply chase the red needle with the black one until they lined up. I can't do it because I can't see it, but in my case it would be there. And you get your exposure and you set it on the camera. So I've got to the end of my first roll of film. So this roll of Fuji was sent to me by a guy called Gianmarco. So Gianmarco, if you're watching, thank you so much. I'm going to use your roll of film. It's Fuji Pro 400H, and I'm going to put it through this thing. So the results are in. The first 10 or 15 frames seem to have some very interesting shutter artifacts that went away, so presumably that was either grit, dirt, or just the shutter loosening up. The lens itself, I don't think it's a fair review. The lens elements were not in the best condition, unfortunately, and I think they flared artificially, which gave the images a kind of nice bloom to them, much like you were using a Pro Mist filter, but I would like to get my hands on a really good version of this lens so I can compare them. The camera also had a slight light leak, which is not uncommon with these old cameras and really not that difficult to fix. So that's the end of our second roll of film. That's enough for today. Thanks for Gianmarco for sending me that film. If you'd like to send me a roll of film and help me out, then there's an Amazon wishlist thingy in the description below. And as ever, if you like what you've seen, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, all of that kind of stuff. And I will see you next week in the next video.